I feel my same shame and guilt that I did every time I spent everything. Let me go to the car. It's Saturday morning. I get out to the car. I turn the car on. There's church music on in the car. I'm like, what is church music doing on a Saturday morning? It wasn't Saturday. It was Sunday. I had stayed there 36 hours and had no idea that I'd done it. That's how bad this got.
Two things that I've learned about gambling addiction are you never know who has a gambling problem and that anyone can develop a gambling problem. Today, I spoke to Dave Y., who's an 11-year Army veteran and a recovering gambler. And I asked him, how did it all start?
Yeah, my name's Dave Yeager. I'm an 11-year veteran of the U.S. Army, and I'm also in recovery for a gambling addiction, which I actually fell into while I was on active duty in the Army. I was stationed in Korea, and it was right after 9/11. Was in my first marriage, had 2 young kids, both under the age of 5. Very stressful time because it was right after 9/11, but also I was arguing and fighting with my first wife then because I was going away for a year, and there was a lot of stress in the household. So, got on the plane, flew to Korea, got into Korea. The first thing I noticed is that there's Patriot missiles pointed at us as we're landing. So that's scare number 1. And then there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, we're all in flak vests. We're going but it wasn't god awful. It just was enough stress to add to the stress I was already under. So they get me onto a bus, they load me up, they take me a couple hours up into Yongsan, which is in Seoul. Yongsan is the main army base. It's in Seoul. I get on there, they put me up in the hotel, which is a very, very nice hotel, right? I get in there, I throw my stuff down. I'm tired, but I can't sleep. I'm hungry, so I go eat, and then I start walking around the hotel, and lo and behold, as I'm walking along, I start hearing these noises. So I'm like, "What is this?" So I kinda peek my head in there, and lo and behold, here's a casino-style slot machine room right there on the military base right in the hotel. So, now they don't exist here in the States because they're illegal in the States through the Department of Defense. However, they're in most established overseas military installations. So I'm like, okay, I gambled. I'm not too far from Atlantic City, so I gambled when I was younger. I had no problem with it. I'm going to go ahead and take out a couple $100. I'm tired, but I'm not ready to sleep. Let me just go in there and chill out until I'm ready to go to bed. So I'm playing along, and the first thing I notice is my shoulders are kind of dropping a little bit. But then I made what I always call the biggest mistake a budding problem gambler can make, and I won. And I didn't break the bank. I didn't, I was not, rolling in riches at that point, but it was enough where in that moment I could remember kind of all that stress and all that pain and all that anguish I was going through. Just in that moment, it went away. Right. Now, it didn't go away forever, of course, but it went away in that moment. And that felt so good that I kept trying to recreate that moment over the course of my time on the peninsula while I was in Korea. Now, I was a non-commissioned officer in charge of my squad. So once I got processed in, they drove me 4 hours south to Pusan, which is at the southern end of the peninsula, and I got put into my unit. Got established, got everything going, and lo and behold, the first weekend there, I walk into the community club, which is like the bar on post, and right there in the corner, now this wasn't nearly as big and elaborate, but here's another one of these game rooms. So I'm like, okay, no big deal. Let me go in here and relax because it felt good when I was up there when I did it. So I got myself something to drink, and then I went in there and I sat down. Well, that what started off as a Friday night and the occasional Friday night turned into Friday, Saturday night, then turned into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, then eventually nights during the week. Um, that built to the point where now I'm going on my lunch breaks. It just kept developing from the point of I'm enjoying this and this feels good to I need to do this. What was happening the whole time was though my first wife would send me a certain amount of money. I set up a bank account there. She'd put money into that account, and that was my spending money. Well, that spending money started disappearing quick because I wasn't winning all the time. That first win I had that first night wasn't happening. So occasionally I would win, but for the most part, I'd walk out broke. So now I'm spending my money for food and the things that I needed there. So once I started running out of money there, I would tell her, I would give her excuses. Oh, somebody needs help. One of my soldiers needs help, or we're going on this trip, or something's happening. So she'd send more money, and that worked for a while, and then it didn't.
All right, so at this point, he was losing money, but there was still some enjoyment, that feeling of a release or an escape. Despite all the negatives that were going on, at this point, he was just losing money. But then I asked him, was there a point that things started to take a turn for the worse?
Then the next thing that happened was I had all this stuff I had shipped over to me, a really nice 10-speed bike. I had all this electronic equipment, all this stuff. I sold it. I just went out and sold it because now this is starting to become an obsession. Now we're only about 3 months into the tour, and this is starting to become an obsession, you know? So I sold all that stuff, and of course, that money's only gonna last for a certain amount of time, right? So then the next thing I did, and this is this is where it begins to get, and every time I talk about it, there's always this little stab feeling I have when I talk about it because it's something a non-commissioned officer in the Army does not do. I started borrowing from my subordinates. Huge, huge, huge mistake. And again, I always felt guilty about it. I always felt shameful about it. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'll get it back to them. I'll give them their money back. No big deal. Um, that continued to escalate. I went home in the middle of the year. I had my 30-day mid-tour leave. So I flew back home. I got to see my kids and all that. And during that 30 days, I didn't gamble at all. In fact, it wasn't really on my mind a whole lot. The funny thing is, the minute I landed back in Korea, the first thing I wanted to do was hit one of those game rooms. And it just picked up basically right where it left off to the point where now the borrowing from subordinates is not working anymore, right? So now I'm desperate. Now I just, so now I did again, I took it to the next level and I stole money from my own unit. And it was not a whopper of money. It was in a petty cash fund that we had kept in a clinic somewhere. So I knew right how to get to it. I knew what to do to get because I was the non-commissioned officer in charge. I was the number two leader in that unit. So I took the money and I'm like, and the mentality the whole time doing it is, I'll win it back. I'll put it back. No big deal. It'll be back in there locked up before anybody knows what happened. Well, it didn't happen that way. I lost it. I lost every bit of it. That, of course, generated an investigation through the Criminal Investigation Division, or CID, the Army CID, and it didn't take long. I sat down, I went right to them, I sat in front of them, I said, "I'm the guy. I did it." At that point, I felt so guilty because going along with this, and this is what's important here.
All right, so with all this going on, it became clear to me that I should ask Dave. At this point, were other people catching on that there was a problem? Or was he living his life pretty normally or even successfully at this point?
Going along with this growing obsession to gamble over and over and over again was this non-commissioned officer that I developed a training program that was being used by other squads throughout the peninsula. I was training my soldiers so that they were super efficient. I had them out doing road marches every day. I got the expert field medical badge, which, if you know anything about that, there's only a 9% first time success rate on that badge, and I got it the first time I did it. So this was an amazing accomplishment. I got promoted. I'm doing all of these things alongside of, telling my unit that I had a meeting so I could go over to the slot room and play and gamble, and all this stuff. And now I stole. So all of this came to a head, and it was about a month and a half before my tour was up that I finally the walls came crashing down on me. So I immediately was taken out of my leadership position. Of course, that had to happen. I was packed up and sent back up to Seoul because that's where headquarters was. I did odds and ends, garbage work up there just so they could keep me busy while they figured out what to do with me. And then I sat in front of my colonel, my commander, and he said to me, I don't know what to do with you. He said, "You're doing all of these great things, and then there's this one character piece. So I don't know what to do with you." So what ended up happening was I lost one rank. I lost the rank that I had gained while I was there and then was sent on to my next unit. The funniest part about that is right after I talked to him, I went to my first sergeant and I had my non-commissioned officer evaluation review. I got highest marks you could get in just about every category except I think one or two. And that was just because they had to, right? The truth is they had no idea what to do with me. They did not know.
All right, his time in Korea had come to a close, so I asked him what happened after Korea. Did things get any better?
So then I was sent on my way. I came back to the States. It didn't get better. It got continuously worse. I went to South Carolina, and for several months I was in South Carolina alone because my ex wanted to finish the school year with my kids where they were. So I was down there by myself. So of course it just started developing right away. And it developed to the point over time that I was in South Carolina and eventually came down on orders to go to Texas, right? By the time went to Texas, my ex did not want to go with me. We had decided she was going to separate from me. During the time I'm in South Carolina, however, was my first of my 4 suicide attempts. I dealt with a really bad back and some issues, so I had painkillers, and I sat in my office one day and I just started popping these painkillers, like they were jelly beans, to the point where um, I can remember kind of my eyes fading out and people saying, "Are you okay?" And then the next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital with my first wife on one side of me and my boss on the other side of me, just looking at me and going, "You're gonna go get help," right? So I did. I went to a civilian psychologist because we were not on an installation and we weren't on a post. So told them what I thought they wanted to hear. I made it through my sessions. I got through all that and I moved on to my next duty station down in Texas because things weren't getting better in my marriage, right? So I went down to Texas. It got even worse. I had my second suicide attempt while I was down there. I again stole from my unit, and this time they put me out of the army. And again, as my commander was giving me my punishment, and by the way, let me say this, the punishment that the fact that they punished me had to happen, right? No matter what the problem was or anything like that, it doesn't excuse the actions that took place. What I did was unbecoming of a non-commissioned officer because I had regained the rank that I had lost when I was in Korea. I worked and worked and worked and got it back and then just threw it all away again when I was in Texas. Um, so while I was in there, and the second suicide attempt landed me in a civilian acute psychological ward for 2 weeks. While I was there, my officer in charge came down with my commander, and I got my punishment in the conference room of this civilian psychological hospital. And again, the commander said to me, completely different commander, said, "We don't know what to do with you because there's so much good you're doing here. So we're going to let you get out of the army so you can get the help you need, right? But it's going to have to be under honorable conditions, not a full honorable discharge." Which again, thank God it was under honorable conditions because I was able to get help through the VA. And he said, "You need to go get the help you need." The problem is they had no idea what that help looked like. So fast forward, I get out. I, basically went right back to Pennsylvania because at this point my ex and I were separated and she had stayed in South Carolina. While I'm in Pennsylvania, over the next few years, this developed into just a horrible, horrible habit where I quit jobs. I quit 4 jobs because it was interfering with my time to gamble. Um, and a couple of more suicide attempts. And I'm gonna kinda go through one because I think this was kind of the pinnacle point where I really knew I needed help. It was like a Friday night, and I was driving down to a casino outside of Philadelphia, the one that I had always gone to. I had a couple $100 with me. I'm driving down there. As I'm driving down, I'm screaming to myself, "Turn around, turn around. You know what's gonna happen. You're gonna spend everything. You don't have this to spend. Don't do it." Right? As I'm driving, I look up in the mirror and I can see myself. I'm punching the roof of my car. My face is bright red and I can see tears running down the side of my out of my eyes, right? But yet I'm still driving. My foot's still on the gas pedal going towards this casino. I drive all the way down there in my head the entire time fighting with myself. I pull into the parking garage. I get out of the car. I walk up. I open the door to this casino. And in that moment, when I heard all the bells and whistles and smelled the smells and saw the people in there, instantly I was okay. Instantly. Now, this was on a Friday night. So I went in and I gambled and I went up. I went up long enough that I stayed for a pretty long time. So it got to the morning, and of course, I went up several $1,000s. I lost it all, right? And I'm like, okay, let me get out of here. I feel my same shame and guilt that I did every time I spent everything. Let me go to the car. It's Saturday morning. I get out to the car. I turn the car on. There's church music on in the car. I'm like, what is church music doing on a Saturday morning? It wasn't Saturday. It was Sunday. I had stayed there 36 hours and had no idea that I'd done it. That's how bad this got. So I drove back home. I had a bottle of antidepressants I had had from the VA. I took the entire bottle, sat in the parking lot of a grocery store that entire day, just embarrassed, ashamed, afraid to go anywhere, and waiting for this stuff to kick in so I could just die and be done with it. And then decided, no, this is not what I want to do. Let me go to the hospital and get some help. So I drove myself to a civilian hospital. They checked me into their psych ward overnight. I had to drink a lot of charcoal and stuff. Um, the next morning I woke up, I was groggy, I was out of it. I had this charcoal slurry that was disgusting, and all of a sudden I realized there was a paycheck in my mailbox. So I checked myself out of that hospital against medical advice. I drove back to the mailbox. I got the mail. I got it cashed. I went back to that same casino. And 3 hours later, I blew the entire paycheck. That's the point when I knew there was nothing else that I could do. I had to give up and let go and have somebody help me.
I asked Dave what that help looked like for him.
I found the Department of Veterans Affairs Gambling Treatment Program, which is in Cleveland, Ohio. It's the oldest residential gambling treatment program in the country of any kind. So I went in there, and the whole time that I'm leading up to this, through the investigation and finding this place, the only thoughts that are going through my head is nobody could ever possibly understand these thoughts that are going through my head. Nobody. I have this regular person on one side, and I have this insane, obsessive, money taking, lying, manipulating person on the other side. So I finally drive out to Cleveland. And by the way, I did gamble on the way to Cleveland because I had to have a last hurrah. Um, Got out there, got checked in, started to talk to my counselor and the people that were there. And within an hour of getting there, I realized I wasn't alone and somebody would get it. So that was the beginning of my recovery. This was in 2007. So I went through that program, went through the aftercare program, stayed in Cleveland for another full year, and I was going to GA meetings on a regular basis. My first Gamblers Anonymous meeting was so funny because I got in there and I'm like, okay, this is a cult. We're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Okay, whatever. But I had to go. The VA made me go. So I got in there and sat down and we read through this book and it was all cool and everything. And then all of a sudden the first person started talking and I'm like, how does this person know me? And then the next person started talking and I'm like, wait, how does this person know me? And all of a sudden I started to realize that, okay, I'm not alone and this connection could be helpful for me. So I went to GA meetings and I started to enjoy it.
Oh, that's awesome. So, was that the end? Was everything fixed from that point on?
Well, a few years into it, or a year or so into it, I'm like, you know what? I feel great. I'm not gambling. I have no urge to gamble. I don't need this stuff anymore. Well, that was a huge mistake because over the next few years, now mind you, I'd already divorced from my ex. I hadn't had contact with my children for 2 years, right? But yet here I am like, oh, I'm healthy as can be. I'm good. I don't need this stuff anymore. I'm going to do it on my own. Well, a few years went by and I didn't gamble. But then I came back to Pennsylvania here. I reconnected with She was my high school sweetheart. I reconnected with her and we hit it off instantly. And in 2014 we got married. Well, the whole time my addiction was starting to build back up again. But it was looking different. This time instead of running off to casinos, I had an addiction to spending. So what I would do is I'd get a credit card and we'd go out and have big dinners and I'd say, "Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, we got this. No big deal." But I never told her I had the credit cards. So then in order to pay that credit card off, I'd get another loan to pay that credit card, which just all I did was buy myself time the whole time thinking, "Oh, I'll get it fixed. I'll get it fixed." It's that same ridiculous gambling mentality until eventually I actually did go out and gamble again to try to solve it all, and of course lost all my money. So this continued to build up and build up and build up until the end of 2019. It was actually the beginning of 2020. It was January 3rd, 2020. I told my wife I felt sick and was sitting on the couch because I didn't feel well. I spent the entire weekend on the couch with a blanket around me, not sick. I was deciding whether I wanted to live or die. I was deciding whether I wanted to truly get into treatment because for the weeks leading up to that, I had a knife in my pocket I'd gotten from the American Legion that if she had found out all the things that I was doing, that I was hiding, like perfectly hiding, that I was going to walk to the back of my property and I had an exit plan in place. So long story short, I sat there for that weekend. And during that weekend, and this is not a joke, and I've told this many times, it's not a joke. I get Morgan Freeman in my head from Shawshank Redemption saying, get busy living or get busy dying. Well, obviously, I chose to get busy living. So on January 6th of 2020, I took myself back to the VA acute psych ward, told them I wanted to hurt myself. Right after that, I called my wife and told her most everything. She did not. It took a while for everything to come out, right? But I started dumping. Spent a week in the psych ward, got myself back into the VA program again. This time, the difference between the first time and this time, the first time I knew I had a gambling problem. This time I knew I was powerless over it unless I did something about it. So I fully engaged in GA and I still go to it to this day. I spent I very much engaged in the treatment program when I was out there. Um, I started my podcast, which is about military service members and veterans. I wrote my book, which is all about my own story and the things that I did. And I say so connected to my recovery now, 4 years into my recovery, that it's an everyday process for me. So it's a very different mentality than it was in 2007 when all of this began. You know, this is the realization that this is a disease. This is not something that's going to cure itself. I have to do the work if I'm going to stay ahead of it. So that's what I do. And now I work for a behavioral health. I do online telehealth and I work with clients who struggle with gambling so that I can share my experiences along with my education to hopefully try to help others.
I also wanted to ask Dave today, what does he do to maintain his sobriety or maintain his recovery from gambling?
I stay firmly connected to my recovery. I do it through Gamblers Anonymous. I do it through the work that I do, the counseling work that I do. I do it through advocacy. I speak on a regular basis. In fact, the month of March, I have 6 different opportunities to talk about military service members and gambling. That's what I do. I just daily I stay connected to it, but it's not work to me. It really isn't. It's this joy. It's a joy to be able to do this and to stay in recovery. So that's mostly what I do is I do as much as I can to stay connected to it.
I also wanted to ask him if he could tell someone who's about to place their first bet anything, what would it be?
This is an addiction. It doesn't strike everybody, but pay attention to what's happening, right? If you go out there and you place your first bet and you find that these urges come up to place more bets, pay attention to those urges. Sometimes it's fun. But if it starts to pull at you and think you have to do, when it goes from I want to do this because it's fun to I have to do this, pay attention to that because this addiction is very real and it's very cunning and it's very vicious. That's what I would say.
As Dave alluded to, there are slot machines on military bases all around the world, and military veterans have a disproportionately high rate of gambling addiction in their population. When I think about the military, I think about discipline and high performance and maintaining self control. But the fact that they're putting slot machines on all the bases, it's just tempting people who have been working so hard to take a load off, take some time off. And for anyone, that can become a problem. So I want to thank Dave for sharing his story because as he's showed us, anyone can get hooked to gambling, but also anyone can recover and live a better life. And to everyone that's watching, thank you for your time. Let's keep getting better together, one day at a time.